And this is, I think, what the psychedelic experience is broadcasting. It's broadcasting the hologrammatic, fractal, altogether, all at once image of totality that our religions have sensed and called God, that the shaman have learned to use as a vast kind of computer for extracting information and for generating healing energy. But it is that there is some kind of controlling, minded, integrated thing behind nature. And we're not going to understand that this weekend, next week, or ever. This is not a relationship of solving a problem. It's a relationship of being an initiate of a mystery and then living your life, in the light of that. And the task of understanding is endless, because understanding is simply the integrated coordination of pattern. And nature is pattern upon pattern, upon pattern, upon pattern, upon level. It has no depth. Its measure cannot be taken. Everything is infinite, and everything is animate, and everything is filled with a kind of deep concern for humanity. I mean, we are the lame little brother because we seem to be cut off from all the rest of this. Well, that's kind of a Blakean take on it. A very complicated question. The answer gets pretty technical, or talking about it gets pretty technical. The thing that's so interesting about psilocybin and DMT is that they're so closely related to ordinary brain chemistry. The brain chemistry of all higher animals runs largely on serotonin. Serotonin is 5-hydroxytryptamine. DMT is N,N-dimethyltryptamine. Psilocybin is 4-phosphoryloxy N,N-dimethyltryptamine, but the phosphoryloxy group goes off as it crosses the blood-brain barrier, so it's 4-hydroxy N,N-dimethyltryptamine. So it's very interesting that these powerful, naturally occurring hallucinogens are in many cases only one molecule away from endogenous neurotransmitters. So in answer to your question, it's possible to suggest that we're as close as one mutation away from significant shifts in the chemical mix of the human brain. And for instance, in the pineal gland, there's an enzyme called adenosine, which is chemically 6-methoxy-tetrahydroharmalan. It's very closely related to the harmine alkaloids in ayahuasca. Well, the persistent myth about ayahuasca is that it creates states of group-mindedness and telepathy. The original alkaloid was actually named telepathine until it was discovered that it was structurally similar to harmine, which had been previously described by Hochstein and Paradis. So, in other words, what's going on here is the possibility that language, telepathy, and all of these mental abilities that are unique among human beings have to do with a very, very small number of mutations in the brain amine production pathways. One of the things that I want to talk about here is the possibility of new forms of communication, and that the psychedelics can stimulate new forms of communication among human beings, even in the way that they created language in the first place. In other words, I see language as a Model A version of something which could be made a lot more efficient and better and effective. You had some. That gave me the idea, and then I stuck with it. I stuck with it somehow and found marijuana, and that went on to LSD. And then my great good fortune, I think, is that just a few months after I took LSD, somebody brought me DMT. And DMT is a miracle. I mean, DMT is like something that fell out of a flying saucer. I mean, it is so strong and so psychedelic. I mean, I can't imagine being more smashed than that, or wanting to be. I mean, it's more like a near-death experience than any near-death experience I ever heard anybody describe. They sound absolutely pedestrian compared to a DMT trip where, you're sure you're dead. You say, what the hell else could it be? And then I went to Asia. I was at Berkeley when I had all these drug experiences, and then I went to Asia and tried to find it with yogas and all that, and ended up smoking a lot of hashish and becoming more cynical than ever about spirituality, and just saying, hashish and LSD. That was, before I went to the Amazon, that was what I discovered that really convinced me you could get somewhere, was, take a bunch of LSD and then smoke great hash on top of that, and really crazy things do go on. And then I went to the Amazon, and, incredible shamanism is happening there. I mean, they don't hold back. The method I used in India was I would just say, what can you show me? I've read all these books. I know how to manipulate all this multisyllabic mumbo-jumbo, but just one thing. I said, oh, no, it's not very pushy. But then when you go to South America, then they just say, okay, let's go out in the forest, we'll get the stuff, we'll cook it up, and tonight we'll show you our best trick. And it slams you to the wall. I mean, you plead for mercy. And it was a vindication, because the thing I want to stress, and I don't know if it's as important to you as it is to me, but you do not have to sell out to any form of airheadism. You can be as tight-assed as you want. You can be as hard-nosed as you want. You can be as demanding, analytical, rational as you want. And the thing is bigger than you are. It'll just take you apart. It'll make you weep like a baby. So there's nothing about faith and sensitivity and reaching. And no. When it comes, it kicks in the front door and takes you prisoner. And that was what the flying saucer meant when it said, because you didn't believe in anything. This is the way to get somewhere. You'll never get anywhere if you believe in stuff, because, it'll take you 6 months to work through Babaji, and then you have to go on to somebody else, and life is just not long enough to give all these guys a crack at your enlightenment. So, you sort of have to goose it along. And the great vindication is then that when you behave like that, when you take that stance, which you would expect would betray you into nihilism, depression, and so forth. Instead, no, that works. That's the method. Then the gold, reject everything but gold. And you know what gold is? It looks like gold. It feels like gold. It's not something that you have to, I mean, I'm amazed at what thin soup is dished out as spiritual food. And it's because we are, as individuals, conflicted, I feel this in myself. I mean, it's hard to take psychedelics. It's not hard to sweep up around the ashram, but it's hard to take psychedelics.
I read some stuff by Andrew Weil when he was talking about going in search of, ayahuasca, the curandero, and he talks a lot about these guys that are mixing up this sloppy brew, and they're drunks, and they're just, I don't even know if you could go down to the Amazon and find, I don't know what you could find. I haven't been there, but what his accounts were is there's a lot of just slop and drunk stuff happening. That most of these, a lot of these guys are alcoholics, you know.
No, you're absolutely
right.
right.
And that's the main thing happening was the alcohol throughout, and the Christianity's just kind of pervaded so much of this stuff that I wonder what's left and how you find it anymore.
Well, it really helps to do your homework. It really helps to go down there knowing as much as you possibly can about all this. Meaning,
apparently so much of what you get out of it has to do with how it's made.
That's right.
How it's mixed.
That's right.
And so on. And if you don't make it yourself and you don't know what's happening, then what have you got?
Because ayahuasca is a combinatory drug, it isn't like peyote or mushrooms or morning glories where you get the thing and eat it, and if you eat it in sufficient amounts, it works. This is something where two plants have been combined, and the proportions must be correct, and the method must be correct. So there's a huge room for personalities to come into it, for fast shuffles of all sorts, and mind games of all sorts to take place.
These guys, a lot of them are very egotistical.
It's true. No, what you have to do if you're into ayahuasca, or what we did, was first of all, we drank a huge amount of swill, and we worked our way slowly through these people. And if somebody appeared to be an asshole, they were so classified and moved on. And eventually, we got to good people. But what we did then was we got samples of their stuff, brought it back, put it through mass spectrophotometers and high-pressure liquid chromatography, saw what the proportions were, collected the live plants, moved them to Hawaii, grew the plants, reconcocted the thing, remass spec'd what we did, and made it as much like the good stuff as possible. So it was a project of 15 years and really maniacal dedication. But I have the faith, that if given sufficient time to work on ayahuasca, you could produce a drug out of there so good that it would be ludicrous to suggest that it was illegal. Because you see, this is brain soup. These are all neurotransmitters. There's not a non-endogenous neurotransmitter in the whole beverage. So really what you're a non-endogenous neurotransmitter, meaning everything in this drug that you're about to drink is already in your head. There's nothing unusual where drugs like ketamine, mescaline, LSD, there's none of that in your body.
What's the trip like?
It's like a slow-release DMT trip. It lasts 4 to 6 hours, and it's intensely visual. And unlike psilocybin, it doesn't have this outer space, science fiction, mega apocalyptarian kind of take on it, which is what psilocybin does. Psilocybin shows you the machines preparing to transport the faithful away from a burning earth. That's not what ayahuasca is about. It's about nature, water, flow, life, energy. It's almost, when MDMA was so hot and people called it an empathy drug and said it makes you empathetic with the people you're with, ayahuasca makes you empathetic with the people you're not with. And that's a much more profound experience because there's so much more of them,
I don't understand that empathetic.
You feel the poignancy of the human situation. You feel, I'm usually in a hut somewhere surrounded by a bunch of Indians, and suddenly I understand what the songs are about. And they're always about the same thing. They're about the water and the people and the life and the fish and lost love, but you have this heart opening thing. Say, the folk, this is their mystery. This is their I'm getting it now. I'm feeling, this huge wave of the wisdom of the folk. And they say this to you in Peru. They say, this is our university. You went to Harvard. We went to ayahuasca. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can comment on ginseng weed, which I believe is the same thing as morning glory seeds?
No, it's different.
But I'm curious about ginseng weed because it grows wild all over. It's on the property, it's on the highway. It's toxic also.
It's quite toxic. It's used shamanically in pre-contact California. The California Indians had what was called the Tolach religion, and they used Jimson weed seeds to initiate people at puberty, boys mostly. It's I'm kind of Pollyannish about drugs. I mean, I'm after a certain thing, which these tryptamine hallucinogens do, and I tend to not pursue these other things too far. I didn't like Datura. It's very hard to have the degree of clarity that I think you should have on a drug. The tryptamine hallucinogens don't interfere with your clarity at all. You know who you are, where you are, what you're doing. I've seen people on Datura. I had an experience with someone on Datura where in the course of the conversation it came out that the guy thought we were in his apartment and I had actually encountered him in the marketplace. Well, that's a serious delusion. You know, that's a serious problem. When I took Datura, all this was in Nepal years ago, I did have peculiar experiences. I mean, it is magical. It is delusory. Reality begins to come apart. These wraith-like, ghost-like creatures would come through my window, and I was waiting to get high, and then my attention would drift, and these things would come through my window, and they would let loose these sheets of newsprint that would flutter down over my lap, and I would fall forward reading these things that were, and as I read, amazement would grow in me and say, this is it, this is the answer, this is it. And then I would pull out and say, is it working? Is anything happening? And that went on, so there were several passes of that, and then it caused me to throw my leg up around my neck, and I got into this kind of thing. And I very carefully unfolded myself and lay back down, and then it happened again. And I thought to myself, I'm really glad I'm alone, because I think this would freak anybody out. And but it was definitely strange. I mean, the guy down the hall from me, I had taken it, he had taken it, and he had the impression in the night that this woman that he was scheming on came to him and that they made love. And in the middle of the night, I got up to go to the John, and I had to cross through his room. And it was also my impression that she was in bed with him. Well, when we sorted it out the next morning, she'd been 30 miles away throughout the whole incident and had never been there. So it's interesting. There are a lot of altered states. Maybe that's a good point to make. There are all kinds of strange states of mind, and many plant-induced. From sorting through them, I've just become sort of fixated on these tryptamine things because they seem to me somehow the most promising and the most real. The hallucinations of Jimson weed are curiously related in my mind. It's some kind of association schema. They're like seances and table tapping and Victorian women in shredded lace dresses, and that's about as far from a DMT hallucination as you can get. I mean, DMT hallucinations are 3, if not 4-dimensional, brightly colored, high-tech, organo-insectoid, so forth and so on.
You talked about the momentum is so strong and then having to change it. And I think of all the people that are opposed to drugs and they think every drug is the same and so forth. It just seems like an impossible task to be able to educate where these drugs would be available and then people could take them and then they'd see the world in a healthier way. What do you have to say about a question like that?
Well, it's this struggle about human nature, defining human nature, Is it good to take certain drugs? Is it always bad to take drugs? Can you always tell a drug from a food, from a spice? What do these words really mean? All we can do is what we are doing, which is replicate the mean. Hold these workshops, try to build a core of consensus about what we're talking about. And this is itself quite elusive, you see, because what we're talking about is a mental event. Less focused than, let us say, orgasm. But even if you're talking about orgasm, here we use this word, but it must mean something different to everybody. Well, the problem is much worse with the psychedelic experience, because nobody wants to be left out. So anybody who's ever taken anything thinks they've had the psychedelic experience and feels fully qualified to hold an opinion on it, when in fact, it's pretty elusive, the real thing. You have to take a heroic dose under the right conditions to really smash through. I mean, yes, there are all kinds of approaches to it. Insight into childhood trauma, recovery of lost memories, opening to your emotional side, insights into the dynamics of the life and people around, all of it. But that is not anywhere near the bullseye. That's just dancing around the rim of it. So we have to, as a community, try and build consensus about what happens at the real center. What's happening at the center of the mandala? What kind of a modality can we describe and create a shared map of that we can come back to the rest of the folks and talk about?